Welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the headlines at this hour. Over 8,800 doctors in South Korea have turned in resignation letters in protest against the government's decision to raise the number of med school admissions. Over 60% of them walked off the job without their resignation being processed. Neither the government nor doctors' associations seem to be backing down, while the lives of some patients are at risk. The United States has vetoed another UN Security Council draft calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S. said this would jeopardize talks to end the war and secure the release of hostages held by Hamas. Instead, Washington is pushing for its own draft, demanding a temporary ceasefire. The mother of dead Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has demanded that President Vladimir Putin gives her son's body so that she can bury him. Meanwhile, Washington is set to slap major sanctions targeting Moscow to hold it accountable for what happened to Navalny. We are seeing a major standoff with the government over plans to increase medical school admissions from next year. As of Tuesday, over 8,800 trainee doctors have handed in their resignations, most being junior doctors. Medical school students are also expressing their solidarity with doctors by registering for a leave of absence. Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
Hospitals are bracing for ongoing medical service shortage on Wednesday as the resident doctors' strike continues for a second day. Beginning at 6 a.m. Tuesday, junior doctors in South Korea staged a walkout against the government's plan to increase the medical school quota by 2,000 to over 5,000 starting in 2025. As of 10 p.m. Tuesday, over 8,800 trainee doctors, or over 70% of the nation's junior doctors from 100 key training hospitals across the country have handed in their resignations. None of the resignations, however, have been accepted. Of those, 7,813 have walked out of hospitals. As for a collective leave of absence by medical students, some 7,600 students from 27 out of 40 medical schools have submitted requests. Students from 3 medical schools have also boycotted classes. The doctor strike led to a vacuum in medical services on Tuesday. Among the 5 major hospitals in Seoul, Severance Hospital saw surgeries drop to less than half of the usual volume. Samsung Medical Center also postponed about 30% of its planned surgeries. A total of 58 calls were made to a government helpline to complain about cancellations. Meanwhile, the Korean Intern Resident Association issued a joint statement on Tuesday demanding the government retract its related policies. They also criticized the government for infringing on members' constitutional right to career choice. The government, in a briefing on Wednesday, expressed deep regret over the statement, saying the people's right to life is the top priority.
The main role of medical professionals is to protect public health and lives, making any group action that endangers life unjustifiable.
The government also emphasized that collective actions will not win any sympathy or support from the public and called for an immediate return to hospitals and engagement in discussions with the government. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
President Yoon called his German and Danish counterparts on Tuesday to explain why he had no choice but to postpone his trips to the two countries. He was supposed to be in Germany and Denmark this week, but the trip was canceled 4 days before the planned departure last Sunday. The top office said Yoon asked the two leaders to understand that his current priority was tackling domestic livelihood issues. During the calls, the leaders shared hopes that despite the trip falling through, bilateral ties would be strengthened going forward, as well as a desire for a future visit to be arranged. The ruling People Power Party's floor leader, Yoon Jae-ok, also highlighted the need to roll out more reforms to better people's livelihoods. Yoon delivered a speech to the whole National Assembly this morning, saying that in the new parliament after the general election in April, the administration and PPP will focus on improving areas like labor, economy and finance, regional growth, and low birth rates. Yoon also emphasized the need for political reforms, saying that it is the role of politics to fix old systems and narrow divisions in society. His speech comes with less than 50 days until the general election and a day after the main opposition Democratic Party floor leader Hong Ik-pyo addressed the parliament. On to diplomacy. The U.S. has reaffirmed cautious support for North Korea's outreach to Japan. The Pentagon's deputy spokesperson, Sabrina Singh, said on Tuesday that Washington would welcome its close ally Japan's talks with North Korea if it were to strengthen regional stability. Separately, U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller also noted Pyongyang's offer to engage with Tokyo, but reiterated Washington's goal of achieving the full denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Last week, the North Korean leader's sister Kim Yo-jong suggested that Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida might be able to visit the North on the condition that Tokyo does not take issue with the regime's right to self-defense and leaves the past abduction of Japanese citizens off the table. Better South Korea-Japan relations are also on the horizon. A bereaved family of a Korean victim of wartime forced labor has received a Japanese company's court deposit money as compensation. It is the first time that such a victim has been able to accept payment from an accused Japanese firm. And our foreign affairs correspondent Peunji brings us the details.
Mr. Lee, who was forced to work at Hitachi Zosen during Japan's colonial rule of Korea, filed a suit against the Japanese company in November 2014. Last December, South Korea's Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling and ordered the company to pay him 50 million Korean won in damages, on top of the delayed interest. But Mr. Lee passed away before the top court finalized its ruling. Then on Tuesday, his family finally received compensation from Hitachi Zosen, making it the first time that a forced labor victim has received compensation from a Japanese company. The family withdrew 60 million Korean won, or about $45,000 from the Seoul Central District Court, which was earlier deposited by Hitachi Zosen as a kind of collateral. A number of South Korean forced labor victims have won suits against Japanese companies, but they have not been able to receive payment directly from Japanese firms, as Tokyo continues to claim all issues had already been settled in a 1965 treaty. To resolve the matter and improve bilateral relations with Tokyo, last March, the Yoon administration unveiled a plan to compensate these victims using funds procured through a public foundation instead. Seoul's foreign ministry said Tuesday that this policy will remain in place, while adding that the victim was able to receive deposit money from Hitachi Zosen in accordance with relevant laws.
Our government's stance remains that we intend to pay the damages and delayed interest to the plaintiffs through the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization by Imperial Japan.
Hundreds of thousands of Koreans were forced into labor in factories and mines in Japan before and during World War II. The historical issue remains one of the biggest obstacles in improving relations with Tokyo. Peunji, Arirang News.
Now to economy. South Korea's auto exports boomed in January, breaking records and becoming the country's main export sector. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Wednesday, the total value of auto exports reached $6.2 billion in January, with 245,000 units shipped overseas. The value of the exports is the highest sum for any month of January on record. It is also the first time since 2015 that the number of vehicles exported in this specific month surpassed 240,000. Strong performance in the auto sector was cited as the main reason why South Korea was able to log a trade surplus last month. Another economics report has found that the number of South Korean men who are not in the labor force because they are caring for their children hit a record high last year. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, nearly 16,000 men were responsible for full-time caregiving in 2023. This was 3 times the figure from 2013 and the highest recorded since data was first compiled in 1999. This has largely been attributed to more established paternity leave systems in companies and increased awareness of men being caregivers. However, the figure is still 50 times lower than the number of women who stay at home for childcare. The number of one-person businesses here in South Korea is also on the rise, reaching a 15-year high in 2023. Our Park Gon-woo went out to find out what's behind the rise and what's needed to help those businesses survive.
A spacious cafe located in Seoul. This lady has been running this cafe for 5 years, all by herself, without hiring any workers. But she's not the only person running a one-person business in Korea. According to Statistics Korea, the number of one-person businesses reached its highest level in 15 years to over 4.3 million in 2023. That figure is the highest since 2008 financial crisis. So what's behind the increase? I asked the cafe owner why she has decided to work alone.
Because of labor costs. I wasn't able to hire people due to low sales when I first started this cafe at the early stage of COVID-19. So I've been running the shop by myself since then.
Rising ingredient prices were another factor that made her operate the shop by herself. She also said that increasing the price of items on her menu was not an easy option, especially when thinking about her regular customers. While other one-person shops have similar concerns, some are coming up with ways to alleviate worries with digital kiosks helping to reduce costs. Nowadays, kiosks like this are replacing workers, which allows these one-person businesses to reduce their labor costs. A kiosk like this costs around 1 million won, or $750, which is more cost-effective than hiring a few people. But as a consequence, college students are having a harder time finding part-time jobs.
There are not many kinds of part-time jobs available. It's difficult because there are only short-term part-time jobs, usually instead of longer-term ones.
Meanwhile, the government announced ways to support small businesses, including through financial support to help pay electricity bills, during recent related policy meetings with citizens earlier this month. However, an expert said more support is needed.
The government should maximize the amount of financial support, including policy funds, to help small and medium-sized businesses in times of difficulties.
While hinting at 4 more months of difficulties before interest rates possibly fall in June, he added all businesses, including small and medium-sized firms, surviving that harsh period is crucial for the Korean economy to grow when the economy returns to normal. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
The United States has yet again vetoed calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza at the UN Security Council on Tuesday. Washington instead proposed its own draft, saying a temporary ceasefire would be more plausible. Lee Seung-jae has the details.
The U.S. vetoed an Algerian-led UNSC draft resolution, which called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza on Tuesday. Washington argues that the draft resolution would jeopardize ongoing talks to end the war in the region. 13 countries on the 15-member body UN Security Council voted in favor of Algeria's resolution, while the UK abstained. However, as a permanent member, the U.S. has veto power. The U.S. veto comes as it drafted its own resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. However, the difference between both plans was the timing of the ceasefire. While the Algerian-led draft resolution called for an immediate ceasefire, the U.S. draft calls for a ceasefire as soon as it is practicable. It also said that such a ceasefire should take place on the condition that all hostages are released, while urging the lifting of barriers preventing aid from reaching Gaza. It's still uncertain when the UNSC will vote on the U.S.-led proposal. The U.S., who are close allies with Israel and refrained from using the word ceasefire in a previous draft resolution, have not only added the word in the recent proposal, but President Joe Biden has also referred to a ceasefire, as the two allies have recently clashed over Israel's operations in the Gaza Strip. The latest proposal also included a call for Israel to not begin a ground assault on the city of Rafah. The UN has also issued a warning that a planned Israeli offensive against the city would lead to a slaughter. Around half of Gaza's population is now crammed into Rafah after being forced to seek shelter there since the start of the armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
As officials are trying to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, thousands of children in Gaza are losing their lives by the minute. My colleague Yoon spoke to an official at a charity organization for children in the occupied Palestinian territory to hear more about what the situation is like there.
Since October 7th, over 29,000 people have died in Gaza, and more than 40% of them are children. Jason Lee, Save the Children's country director for the occupied Palestinian territory, says that a ceasefire is the only way to prevent more children from dying.
And again, it's so important because children need to believe that they have a future, that they will survive tomorrow, they'll have a future, rebuild the health facilities, rebuild the schools, rebuild the homes. But the first step is really the ceasefire.
There's also the impact on their mental health.
They see that their homes are being destroyed. They see their families being killed, their communities destroyed. They hear the fighting, they hear the airstrikes, the machine guns, the shelling, the tanks.
He shared the story of a 4-year-old girl whom he met in Gaza in December last year.
We have no idea who she is, how she got there, or where she came from. And she was in such a state of catatonic shock. She wasn't speaking, cold and clammy, really, and we had no idea when she last ate.
He says this is just one story of at least 17,000 children who are estimated to have lost their family. While they have no one to take care of them, humanitarian aid entering the Strip is becoming even more challenging. Rafah is congested with displaced people living out in the open, and access to other regions is not allowed by the Israeli Defense Forces.
Again, we have not been able to get to the north of Gaza. We've not been able to distribute to the middle areas of Gaza. And moving in Rafah is becoming more difficult because it's the congestion. I mean, none of the roads are passable right now. The trucks can't get through. We can't deliver enough supplies, and the people are desperate.
Israel's full-scale ground operation in Rafah means the children will be either killed immediately by the fighting or die from starvation or as a result of public health emergencies.
We already see diarrheal diseases increasing. It's cold, it's wet, they will get pneumonia. And what happens if there's cholera? So all of this will happen to civilians. We will see the morbidity and mortality, especially for children, increase.
70% of injuries have been either a woman or a child. Children are more susceptible to malnutrition and diseases and will die quicker. The lives of Gaza's 1.1 million children depend on an immediate and definitive ceasefire. Yoon, Arirang News.
Following the death of one of Vladimir Putin's fiercest critics, Alexei Navalny, the global community, government officials, and his family have responded with demands for the recovery of his body, as well as transparency over the details of his death. Moon Hye-ryun reports.
I appeal to you, Vladimir Putin. The resolution of the issue depends solely on you. Let me, finally, see my son.
The mother of Alexei Navalny, a long-standing critic of Vladimir Putin who died in a remote prison last week, pleaded for the Russian president to return her son's body in a YouTube video. Authorities at the Siberian penal colony where he was serving a 3-decade-long sentence announced his death on Friday local time, claiming that the cause was sudden death syndrome. His family has been unable to recover his body so far, being told that he would be released only after a post-mortem examination had been conducted. Navalny's team believes that the campaigner was murdered on the orders of Putin and that his body is being withheld so they can cover traces, especially since he appeared to be in good health in a court video a day before his death. Western governments have also blamed the Kremlin, with the United States pressing for complete transparency on the details of his death. US President Joe Biden also announced a new wave of sanctions against Russia to be implemented on Friday in light of this development and the ongoing war in Ukraine. While details of the new sanctions have not yet been released, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said they will target Moscow's defense and industrial bases, as well as sources of economic revenue. This comes in addition to the pre-existing range of sanctions that the US has imposed on Russia for both the war in Ukraine and the 2020 poisoning and imprisonment of Navalny. Despite the Russian government's firm stance rejecting biased and unrealistic assumptions over Navalny's death, more than 400 people have been arrested as people gathered at vigils and protests across the country. Demonstrations are also taking place near Russian embassies across the world. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In London, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is making a final appeal against his extradition to the US. Assange's lawyers presented his case at Tuesday's High Court hearing, arguing that the American government is seeking to punish him for exposing serious criminal acts committed by the US state. His lawyers said that the extradition to the US poses a risk where Assange will suffer a flagrant denial of justice. Assange did not appear on the first day of his hearing due to illness. The WikiLeaks founder has been fighting extradition to the US since 2010. If he fails to convince the court in the two-day hearing, Assange will have exhausted all appeals routes in the UK and will be processed for extradition to the US. The 52-year-old spent 7 years in self-exile at the Ecuadorian embassy in London and has been in a UK high-security prison since 2019. He is wanted by the US for disclosing sensitive military files in 2010 and 2011. In Spain, a Russian pilot who defected to Ukraine with his helicopter last year has been found shot to death. Local media confirmed on Monday that the defector pilot's body, riddled with bullets, was found in an underground garage near Alicante last week. Spanish authorities confirmed that the body of Maxim Kuzminov was found on February 13th in the town of Villajoyosa in the south of Spain. Ukraine's GUR military intelligence service confirmed the identity of Kuzminov, who flew to Ukraine in his Mi-8 helicopter last August. Media reports said the defected pilot had been living in Spain under a fake identity. Russia's foreign intelligence chief, Sergei Narishkin, was quoted by TASS news agency saying that this traitor and criminal became a moral corpse when he initially planned to defect. Canada plans to donate more than 800 drones to Ukraine to help its war with Russia. Canadian Defence Minister Bill Blair announced the move on Monday, saying they were paid for by the $370 million military assistance funding Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced in Kiev last year. The Skyranger R-70 drones have a face value of around $70 million in total. Canada's Defence Ministry confirmed in a statement that over $7 billion have been committed in aid to Ukraine since February 2022, including some $2 billion in military assistance. In Italy, residents of Milan were seen resorting to face masks outdoors as levels of fine particles and other air pollutants exceeded legal limits and ranked among the highest in the world. Swiss real-time air quality website IQ Air on Sunday labeled Milan unhealthy, naming the city in the top 10 most air-polluted cities in the world, alongside Dhaka in Bangladesh, Lahore in Pakistan, and Chengdu in China. Between Sunday and Monday, the PM 2.5 level was 24 times above the limit recommended by the WHO. Kim Xiang, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The whole nation is seeing either heavy snow or rain today. So heavy snow has been pounding Gangwon-do province since yesterday. Mountainous regions in Gangwon-do could see up to 60 centimeters of blizzards. The capital and central inner regions are forecasted 1 to 10 centimeters of snow into tomorrow. Heavy snow alerts are in place across Gangwon-do province, and the advisory could be expanded to the northeast of Gyeonggi-do. Meanwhile, coastlines along Gyeongsang-Namdo province and Jeju Island are under a strong wind advisory today. Southern regions and Jeju are seeing rain instead. Mountainous regions on Jeju could receive up to 100 millimeters. The rest of the south could see 10 to 60 millimeters of showers. As for today's afternoon temperatures, highs are only a couple of degrees higher than this morning, topping out at 4 degrees in Seoul, but 16 degrees over on Jeju. East of Gangwon-do will see snow into Friday, while rain continues on Jeju into Sunday. So please take the weather into account if you're traveling to those areas. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you at this hour. We'll bring you more stories from Korea and around the world at the same time tomorrow.